Dr. Martin Luther King was born January 15, 1929. And while honoring his birthday, you can learn a lot about his life with a visit to the National Civil Rights Museum over in Memphis. As Tammi Arender discovered, the newer edition offers even more than a lesson in history.
While waiting, we got somebody on the switchboard, so I told Jesse to call Coretta.
Dr. Martin Luther King came to Memphis to prove that he could lead a peaceful, nonviolent march here. And here he died violently shortly before he was to speak again before a mass rally of his followers.
This is the final exhibit of this particular museum, part one as we call it. You're now entering room 306. We call it the King Room. This was the room where he was staying on April 4th, 1968. And this room has been recreated to look identical to how it looked in '68. Everything from the food service there, to the cigarette butts, to the newspaper on the other bed. For so many years, this was the final stop of the tour. And as you can imagine, it was a very emotional part of the exhibit to be here at the room, and then to be able to turn to the balcony, see the wreath, and to see where he was actually standing.
He was out here one day. Yes. I messed up, mister.
He was standing at that spot right there.
Yes, he was standing at this spot right here on the balcony. So people could stand here and actually look across the street to where we now have our expansion, but where the rooming house is located.
That was April 4th, 1968. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dies from an assassin's bullet at the Lorraine Motel in downtown Memphis. In 1991, the Lorraine is turned into a civil rights museum and living history lesson on that movement. Then 9 years later, another community fundraising campaign and the other critical piece of civil rights history is purchased. The rooming house across the street where James Earl Ray was said to have fired the fatal shot is bought and renovated for $11 million. Gwen Harmon was gracious enough to give us a tour.
They can actually stand and visit in that space, and it's just as compelling, I would think, as standing on the balcony or standing in the courtyard or at the King Room, because now you get to see the finishing part of the story. So as we go through the tunnel gate, we do see images from the day of his funeral.
When you enter the rooming house and expansion, it's like stepping into the past and the future all at the same time. First, you're met with never-before-seen images at King's funeral. You'll also read a scrolling marquee of quotes from King's family that day. But then, you're quickly moved into the future with an interactive display.
Across the street, it's so high-tech. And the kids, of course, all the computerized and technology generation, they know how to work that. And they see their own images. They see the Spike Lees and the Tiger Woodses, and they say, oh, you mean before Tiger there were other black, golfers, or before Venus and Serena there were other black tennis stars who paved the way? And they see that, so they can tie in history and the future and the hope and how everybody still has a call to action no matter what your age is.
The Civil Rights Museum expansion isn't only about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement, but it also pays to honor the other leaders throughout history who have given their lives for the sake of human rights.
After you see the success stories that have come through not only King's efforts, but others who fought for civil and human rights around the globe, you're taken through the chronological order of events of King's last days, which again causes you to think about the future and many of the questions that still remain a mystery. You can also see the evidence gathered that day in 1968, from the rifle to the blanket it was wrapped in. But the most moving part of the expansion is this room where James Earl Ray was staying, then the bathroom, the cracked window where his rifle rested on the windowsill, the line of fire to the balcony of room 306 across the street.
Dr. King was here in 1968. This is where he was staying. After his death, no one came back to the Lorraine. It was just a place that they would pass by and look at the balcony where he had been standing at the time of the assassination and basically keep going.
But now tour groups flock to this historical corner of Memphis where one man was killed, but his dream was not. And the dream is given wings in the Civil Rights Museum expansion. You feel a range of emotions when you walk through the pages of history.
At first, a sense of sadness because, of course, a great man was killed here. And then when they realized what he left behind, that, you know, in death, the movement did not end, neither did the legacy. In fact, it grew. So then we see a sense of hope. And that's what we were going for with the expansion, a sense of accomplishment, and then a call to action. What are you going to do today?
It's here that black, white, young, and old are encouraged, no, compelled, to think about more than themselves and just living for today.
Peeling back the layer of the outer skin and realizing that underneath it we're all people, we're all human beings. And I think that God did that on purpose to force us to learn about each other's differences, but that even though we look differently, we may speak differently, that we all have the same common thread. We all want to be respected. We all want to be loved.
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.